Look, I'll be the first to admit that the Galactic Council's First Contact Division isn't exactly the most exciting department in the cosmos. Most days we're just pushing papers across quantum desks and arguing about whether a species has achieved sufficient technological advancement to warrant introduction to the galactic community. But I'd been in this job long enough to know when something truly interesting walks through our metaphorical door. Oh, sorry, I should introduce myself. Commander Pex Brightwing, Senior First Contact Coordinator, Third Circle of Excellence, and proud holder of the Most Organized Filing System Award 6 cycles running. Yes, we actually have an award for that. No, I'm not making this up. And yes, I display the trophy prominently on my desk, right next to my collection of bureaucratic merit badges. But this isn't about my impressive collection of accolades. This is about the day Earth showed up on our sensors and proceeded to turn everything we knew about first contact protocols into something resembling a confused Yorlak during mating season. For those unfamiliar with Yorlaks, imagine a creature that looks like what you'd get if you crossed an octopus with a balloon animal and gave it severe anxiety. Now, normally when we detect a potentially spacefaring civilization, we have a very specific set of procedures. First, we observe them for approximately one local solar cycle to ensure they're not going to accidentally blow themselves up. Then we initiate a series of carefully calculated mathematical signals to establish basic communication. Finally, we send in our crack team of cultural integration specialists who have spent years studying the proper way to say hello without accidentally declaring war or proposing marriage. It's a system that's worked flawlessly for over 10,000 years. We've successfully integrated 472 species into the galactic community without a single major diplomatic incident. Well, unless you count the Xylaxian handshake debacle of 2847, but we don't talk about that. Mainly because 3 departments are still filling out the paperwork. Earth, however, didn't show up on our sensors so much as it announced itself with all the subtlety of a supernova in a library. One day, our detection arrays picked up what appeared to be a primitive radio signal. The next thing we knew, our systems were bombarded with thousands of different transmissions, ranging from something called reality television to declassified military documents about protocols for alien contact. That's right. They had already written their own first contact protocols, multiple ones, from different nations, organizations, and what appeared to be several very enthusiastic individuals operating out of their parents' basements. I remember sitting at my desk, my third set of eyes twitching as I reviewed the preliminary report. This can't be right, I muttered to myself, scrolling through the data. They can't have. They wouldn't dare. But they had. And they did. And that, my friends, is where our trouble really began. In retrospect, I should have known something was different about humans when our initial psychological assessment came back with 17 addendums and a note that simply read good luck with this one. But I was too busy being offended by their presumption to see what was coming. I mean, really. The audacity of a pre-FTL civilization to just write their own first contact protocols. We had a system. We had forms. We had a color-coded manual thicker than a Gorgaxian slug's hide. Who did these humans think they were? Little did I know, I was about to find out exactly who they thought they were. And more importantly, why they might have had a point about doing things their own way. But first I had to call an emergency meeting of the Council. And if there's one thing more complicated than first contact protocols, it's getting 12 different species of bureaucrats to agree on proper meeting procedures. At least I remembered to bring snacks. When dealing with humans, I was quickly learning that one should always be prepared for the unexpected. Have you ever tried to herd cats? Neither have I, mainly because Earth fauna wasn't part of my xenobiological studies. But after watching humans respond to our initial detection probes, I imagine it's a lot like that. Except the cats are all wearing business suits and arguing about proper diplomatic etiquette. We started with our standard approach, a simple mathematical sequence broadcast directly to their largest scientific installations. According to our protocols, this should have prompted them to form a unified response team and begin preparations for formal contact. Instead, within 48 Earth hours, we detected no fewer than 147 different reply signals, each claiming to be the official response. The United Nations had one. NASA had another. Something called SETI was practically jumping up and down, waving their algorithmic hands. The European Space Agency went with their own version. China launched a completely different initiative. Russia. Well, Russia was being Russia. But that wasn't even the weird part. Private companies started getting involved. One eccentric billionaire changed his social media profile picture to what he claimed was an accurate representation of our species. It wasn't even close. We don't look anything like elongated grey humanoids. Thank you very much. Another corporation hastily assembled what they called a first contact task force and began broadcasting advertisements into space. Advertisements. As if we were interested in something called a limited time offer on premium satellite coverage. This is unprecedented, I announced during our emergency council session, my antennae twitching with stress. They're not following any of the established patterns. Ambassador Dax Moonweaver, our resident expert in unusual cases, lounged in her gravity chair with an infuriating air of amusement. Now, I should mention that Dax has a reputation for unconventional solutions. She's the kind of diplomat who once solved an interstellar trade dispute by introducing both parties to something called karaoke. The fact that it worked only made it more annoying. Perhaps Dax suggested, her bioluminescent spots pulsing with barely contained mirth, we should consider that their chaos might actually be their strength. The council chamber erupted in horrified gasps. Chief Administrator Vaughn nearly choked on his ceremonial peacekeeping tablets. Preposterous. Chaos is the enemy of proper diplomatic relations. Is it though? Dax pulled up a holographic display of Earth's various responses. Look at this. They're approaching the same problem from hundreds of different angles simultaneously. They're not just thinking outside the box, they're questioning whether the box should even exist. I rubbed my primary temples, feeling a headache coming on. Ambassador Moonweaver, are you seriously suggesting we abandon thousands of years of carefully crafted protocols because humans can't get their act together? Not abandon, she corrected, her spots now twinkling in that way they do when she's about to suggest something that will make my life significantly more complicated. Adapt. Evolution favors diversity after all. And these humans? They're nothing if not diverse. That's when she dropped her real bombshell. I propose we let them try it their way. The silence that followed was so profound you could have heard a quantum particle drop. Chief Administrator Vaughn actually did drop his tablets this time. 3 different secretaries fainted, and I'm pretty sure the artificial gravity hiccuped from sheer shock. The way I managed to sputter. They don't have a way. They have hundreds of ways. None of which, I might add, conform to any recognized standard of interstellar diplomacy. Dax's smile widened. Exactly. Think about it, Commander. Every species we've contacted so far has followed our carefully constructed protocols, and yes, it's worked. But have you ever wondered if it worked because it was the best way, or simply because it was the only way we allowed? I hate it when Dax makes sense. I hate it even more when she makes sense while suggesting something that's going to generate an unprecedented amount of paperwork. But as I looked at the ever-growing display of human responses, their creativity, their enthusiasm, their sheer stubborn determination to do things their own way, I began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she had a point. Fine, I conceded, already mentally calculating how many new forms we'd need to create for this. But when this inevitably goes wrong, I want it noted in the official record that I voiced my concerns. Noted, Dax replied cheerfully. Now, shall we tell them they have permission to proceed with their own protocols, or should we just sit back and watch what they do next? Given their track record so far, I don't think our permission would make much difference either way. And that, dear listeners, is how the Galactic Council's First Contact Division found itself about to embark on what would become known as Operation Let Them Try. Or, as it was unofficially dubbed in certain circles, Operation What's the Worst That Could Happen. In retrospect, we really should have known better than to tempt fate with a name like that. You know that feeling when you're watching someone make a series of increasingly questionable decisions, but you've already committed to letting them learn from their mistakes? That was basically the entire Galactic Council for the next 3 Earth months. The moment we announced that humanity could proceed with their own first contact protocols, the planet erupted into what I can only describe as organized chaos. And I use the term organized very, very loosely here. The United Nations hastily assembled what they called the Global First Contact Initiative, or GFCI. This promptly led to several hours of confusion when numerous humans thought it had something to do with electrical safety. I still don't understand that joke, but apparently it's hilarious if you're human. Enter Dr. Eleanor Ellie Blackwood, who became Earth's accidental coordinator through what humans call being in the wrong place at the right time. Dr. Blackwood wasn't supposed to be in charge of anything. In fact, she was only at the UN that day to present her decidedly unconventional thesis on interspecies communication through interpretive dance and meme theory. Yes, you read that correctly. No, I'm not making this up. I have the presentation slides in my personal archives, and they still give me migraines. But here's the thing about Dr. Blackwood. While everyone else was arguing about proper diplomatic channels and traditional first contact methods, she was the only one who stood up and said, "Hey, maybe we should consider that aliens might not think like us at all." She got the job because she made the committee laugh. Not with a joke, mind you, but with a startlingly accurate impression of how she imagined a bureaucratic alien might react to Earth's various attempts at contact. I'm not saying her impression of me was spot on, but several of my colleagues have the recording saved in their entertainment files. Under Dr. Blackwood's surprisingly competent leadership, Earth's preparation methods were unique, to say the least. Instead of following any single approach, she advocated for what she called the kitchen sink protocol, as in, throw everything at them, including the kitchen sink. Look, she explained during one of their global broadcasts, which we were definitely not supposed to be monitoring, but come on, how could we not? We don't know what's going to work. So let's try everything. What's the worst that could happen? There's that phrase again. I'm beginning to think humans have a peculiar relationship with tempting fate. Their preparation methods included, but were not limited to, a global contest for designing the most welcoming first contact message, something called a TikTok challenge about alien greetings, a worldwide poll on what Earth's official first words should be, crash courses in every known form of human communication, a documentary series titled How Not to Get Invaded, a Beginner's Guide, and my personal favorite interpretive dance workshops for the diplomatic corps. Dr. Blackwood's reasoning: if we don't know what will work, we should be ready for anything. Besides, the worst outcome isn't failing, it's not trying everything we could have. The day of humanity's first official contact attempt arrived with all the grace of a quantum hiccup. We had positioned our diplomatic vessel in Earth orbit, ready to receive their chosen representatives through our standard matter transportation system. What we got instead was, well, let me paint you a picture. The delegation included Dr. Blackwood, naturally, wearing what appeared to be a combination of formal diplomatic attire and something she called Casual Friday. A team of linguists armed with everything from ancient hieroglyphics to emoji charts. A professional dance troupe. 3 different types of musicians. A chef, because apparently humans believe food is universal. And a therapy dog named Lieutenant Waffles. Yes, they brought a dog. To first contact. And you know what? Lieutenant Waffles turned out to be instrumental in what happened next, but we'll get to that. As they materialized in our reception chamber, Dr. Blackwood took one look at our welcoming committee and did something that violated approximately 47 different protocols. She laughed. Not nervously. Not diplomatically. She threw her head back and laughed with genuine delight. Oh my God, she managed between gasps, you look nothing like we imagined. This is fantastic. I was about to call security when I noticed something peculiar. Ambassador Dax was laughing too. Then Chief Administrator Vaughn started making his species equivalent of chuckling. Soon, the entire chamber was filled with various forms of alien mirth. That's when Lieutenant Waffles decided to make his contribution to interstellar diplomacy by doing what dogs do best. He got excited and started wagging his tail. What happened next would rewrite our understanding of first contact protocols forever. But first I had to deal with the fact that a Earth canine had just violated our most sacred space with what humans call zoomies. I wish I could say this was the most unusual part of their first contact attempt. It wasn't. Not by a long shot. If you've never seen a dog play fetch with a quantum data pad, I highly recommend it. Not because it's proper diplomatic protocol, it absolutely isn't, but because watching 12 different species of highly trained diplomats try to explain why it's inappropriate while simultaneously fighting the urge to throw the pad just one more time is something I'll treasure forever. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's back up to the moment when everything went gloriously, spectacularly wrong. Or right, depending on your perspective. After the initial bout of interspecies laughter died down, we attempted to proceed with our standard diplomatic protocols. First up, the traditional greeting of peaceful intent, a ceremony that had successfully initiated relations with hundreds of species. Dr. Blackwood and her team watched politely as we began the carefully choreographed series of gestures and tonal harmonics. About halfway through, she raised her hand like a student in class. "Quick question," she said, interrupting a particularly crucial harmonic convergence. "Is this meant to simulate the gravitational dance of binary stars, or are you trying to tell us about your agricultural practices?" The chamber went silent. Chief Administrator Vaughan's ceremonial robe actually wrinkled in shock. Neither I managed to respond. "This is the universal greeting of peace." Oh, Dr. Blackwood brightened. "In that case, might I suggest something?" Before anyone could stop her, she turned to her team and made a series of quick hand signals. The dance troupe immediately took position. The musicians readied their instruments, and Lieutenant Waffles sat at attention, tail wagging with anticipated joy. What followed was either the greatest diplomatic innovation in galactic history or the most elaborate chaos theory experiment ever conducted. Possibly both. The dancers began a routine that somehow incorporated elements of our own greeting with what I later learned was a combination of ballet, breakdancing, and something called the Macarena. The musicians accompanied them with a fusion of classical earth music and what appeared to be improvised interpretations of our harmonic sequences. And Lieutenant Waffles, well, he just did what made him happy, which turned out to be running circles around everyone while barking in surprisingly good rhythm. That's when Trevor Space Cowboy Martinez made his grand entrance. He wasn't supposed to be part of the official delegation at all. He was actually part of the catering staff, hired to manage the post-contact refreshments. But when he saw what was happening, he decided, in his own words, to add a little flavor to this cosmic gumbo. Martinez sauntered into the middle of the impromptu performance, wearing what he insisted was traditional Earth diplomatic attire. It wasn't, we later learned it was something called a rhinestone cowboy suit, and began teaching the nearest alien diplomats how to do something called the two-step. I was about to call the whole thing off when Ambassador Dax grabbed my arm. "Look," she whispered, her bioluminescent spots pulsing with excitement. The chamber had transformed. Species that had spent millennia rigidly adhering to diplomatic protocols were mingling. Actually mingling. The Zyraxians, famous for their strict adherence to personal space, were attempting to learn Earthline dancing. The Voltarians, who communicated primarily through carefully modulated energy pulses, were trying to whistle along with the music. Even Chief Administrator Vaughan was tapping all four of his feet in time with the rhythm. "This shouldn't be working," I muttered, watching as Martinez taught a group of junior diplomats something called the electric slide. But it is Dr. Blackwood appeared beside me, grinning. "You know why? Because we're not trying to follow a script. We're just being ourselves and inviting you to do the same." "That's not how diplomacy works," I protested weakly. "Maybe that's exactly how it should work," she countered. "Look around. When was the last time you saw representatives from this many species truly enjoying each other's company?" She had a point. The usual first contact process typically took weeks of careful negotiation just to establish basic communication protocols. Yet here we were, barely 3 hours in, and I'd just watched the High Counselor of the Plutaxian hegemony attempt to teach Lieutenant Waffles to shake hands. The Council's horrified fascination was palpable. Various members kept looking between their diplomatic manuals and the scene before them, as if trying to find the section that covered what to do when first contact turns into an impromptu intergalactic party. "I believe," Ambassador Dax announced, her spots now practically strobing with delight, "that we may need to reconsider our standard protocols." "Because of a dog and a dancing cowboy?" I asked incredulously. "No," she replied, watching as Martinez now led a conga line of diplomats around the chamber. "Because in 3 hours humans have achieved more genuine cultural exchange than we typically manage in 3 weeks of formal negotiations. But there's no structure, no proper procedure. How are we supposed to document this?" Dr. Blackwood patted my shoulder sympathetically. "Sometimes the best structure is allowing for a little chaos. Besides," she added with a wink, "I've been recording everything. We can always write the procedures afterward to match what actually worked." That's when Lieutenant Waffles decided to bring me his favorite quantum data pad for another round of fetch, and I realized something profound. Maybe, just maybe, the humans were onto something with their chaotic approach to diplomacy. After all, it's hard to maintain diplomatic tensions when you're trying to convince a dog that sensitive technical equipment is not, in fact, a chew toy. And somewhere in the background, I could hear Martinez teaching a group of very interested aliens about something called karaoke. I made a mental note to update our first contact protocols to include a section on noise control, and possibly a subsection on why teaching the Voltaireans Sweet Home Alabama might not be the best introduction to Earth culture. But that would come later. For now, I had a data pad to throw. Again. 3 days after what was now being called the Great Diplomatic Dance-Off, I found myself preparing a report that would either get me promoted or permanently reassigned to monitoring pre-industrial civilizations in the Outer Rim. There's no middle ground when you're trying to explain why allowing a therapy dog to become an honorary member of the Galactic Council was actually a stroke of diplomatic genius. But here's the thing, it was genius. Accidental, chaotic, utterly unpredictable genius. I was reviewing the data in my office when Ambassador Dax dropped by, her spots still occasionally flickering with remembered amusement. "Have you noticed," she asked, "that we've made more progress on cross-species communication in the past 3 days than we typically do in 3 months? She was right, of course. The humans' haphazard approach had accidentally solved several long-standing diplomatic challenges. The Zyraxians, for instance, had always struggled with understanding emotional contexts in other species' communications. But after watching Lieutenant Waffles demonstrate what humans call puppy dog eyes, they suddenly grasped the concept of non-verbal emotional cues. And then there was Trevor Martinez. Our xenolinguists were still trying to understand how his down-home country charm had managed to bridge communication gaps that had stumped our best translators for centuries. Apparently, something about the way he mixed metaphors and told rambling stories about his grandmother's cooking resonated across species barriers in ways our carefully crafted diplomatic phrases never could. "They're not following any logical pattern," I muttered, scrolling through the event logs. "They're just doing things." Exactly, Dax's spots pulsed triumphantly. "That's what makes it work. Every other species we've contacted has tried to adapt to our protocols. Humans just keep being human, and somehow that makes everyone else feel comfortable being themselves." The evidence was hard to argue with. Dr. Blackwood's kitchen sink protocol had resulted in 17 new forms of interspecies art, a cookbook of cross-cultural recipes, mostly involving something called barbecue, 3 different diplomatic dance styles, and a pending application for Lieutenant Waffles to become an official therapy dog for the entire Galactic Council. The Council's emergency session to discuss these developments was interesting. Picture, if you will, the most dignified assembly of alien diplomats in the galaxy, all trying to maintain their composure while watching videos of their colleagues attempting to learn the chicken dance. Perhaps Chief Administrator Vaughn suggested, his ceremonial robe still slightly wrinkled from participating in what Martinez had called a group huddle. "We have been too rigid in our approach to first contact." The chamber erupted in murmurs of agreement, punctuated by the occasional bark from Lieutenant Waffles, who had somehow acquired his own ceremonial collar and a permanent seat next to the High Counselor. The humans, I found myself saying, hardly believing the words coming out of my mouth, might actually be onto something. Their chaos has a pattern to it. A method to their madness, Dax suggested, grinning. "More like an anti-method," I replied. "They succeed precisely because they're willing to fail spectacularly. They try everything, keep what works, and somehow turn their mistakes into new protocols." The Council spent the next several hours reviewing the data, watching recordings, and gradually coming to a conclusion that would have seemed impossible just days before. Maybe, just maybe, the best first contact protocol was not having a rigid protocol at all. Dr. Blackwood, when informed of our conclusions, just smiled that knowing smile of hers. "You know," she said, "sometimes the best way to make friends is to stop trying so hard to make friends. Just be yourself and let others be themselves." "But how do we standardize that?" I asked, my bureaucratic mind still struggling with the concept. "That's the neat part," Martinez chimed in, adjusting his rhinestone-covered collar. "You don't. You just make sure everyone knows it's okay to be a little weird." Lieutenant Waffles barked what I chose to interpret as agreement, and I realized something that would change my entire approach to diplomacy. Sometimes the best protocol is knowing when to throw out the protocol book entirely. And if that meant occasionally playing fetch with quantum data pads, well, maybe that wasn't such a bad thing after all. I still filed all the proper paperwork, though. Some habits die hard. You haven't lived until you've seen a committee of bureaucrats try to standardize chaos. It's like watching someone try to alphabetize a rainbow, technically possible, but entirely missing the point. Nevertheless, that's exactly what we attempted to do in the weeks following what had now been officially designated as the human incident and unofficially dubbed the Great Galactic Dance Party by certain less formal members of the Council. The new Controlled Chaos Protocol, and yes, I'm aware of the inherent contradiction in that name, was unlike anything we'd ever implemented before. Instead of our traditional 2,347-page manual of precise diplomatic procedures, we now had a single page that read, Step 1, be yourself. Step 2, let them be themselves. Step 3, bring snacks. Step 4, have a therapy animal on standby. Note if something weird happens, roll with it. Dr. Blackwood, upon reviewing our new guidelines, suggested adding Step 5, dance like nobody's watching, even though everyone definitely is. We included it as an optional addendum. The implementation was interesting. Our first test case was a newly discovered civilization in the Andromeda Galaxy. Instead of our usual team of carefully trained diplomats, we sent a traditional diplomatic corps, for old time's sake, 3 human cultural advisors, a chef specializing in fusion cuisine, a dance instructor, and yes, Lieutenant Waffles, Lieutenant Waffles' daughter, following in her father's diplomatic footsteps. The result? The fastest and most successful first contact in Council history. Turns out there's something universally disarming about watching highly trained diplomats try to learn the Macarena while a happy dog runs circles around them. You know what your species' real gift is? I asked Dr. Blackwood during one of our now regular informal briefings held in what used to be the formal reception chamber, now converted into something humans call a lounge. Our ability to make anything into a party, she suggested, sipping something called a cosmic colada that Martinez had invented. Your ability to make mistakes look intentional, I replied. You humans don't just accept chaos, you embrace it, learn from it, and somehow turn it into a feature rather than a bug. That's because we learned a long time ago that perfection is overrated, Martinez chimed in, adjusting his now official galactic cultural attaché cowboy hat. It's the imperfections that make things interesting. The Council's annual report on the new protocols read like a fever dream to our traditional members. First contact success rate up 300%. Average time to establish diplomatic relations down 73%. Interspecies cultural exchange programs at an all-time high. Record number of diplomatic dance parties. Unprecedented demand for Earth-style barbecue restaurants in diplomatic sectors. Earth, meanwhile, had become something of a mandatory field trip destination for aspiring diplomats throughout the galaxy. Not for our traditional diplomatic training, though that still happened, but for what we now called chaos immersion studies. The sight of alien diplomats learning to line dance at the Texas State Fair while eating something called a corn dog has become surprisingly common. Though we did have to add a warning about human food spice levels after an unfortunate incident with some jalapeno poppers, and a delegation from a species with particularly sensitive taste buds. Looking back now, I can't help but laugh at how worried we were about humans doing things their way. We were so focused on maintaining order that we forgot something fundamental about the universe. It's inherently chaotic, and sometimes the best way to create harmony is to embrace the discord. These days, my office still has that award for most organized filing system. But next to it sits a new trophy, a human-designed award for most flexible diplomatic approach. It features a cartoon dog wearing a boatie and has "Roll with it" engraved on the base. I keep it right next to my emergency stash of dog treats. You never know when you might need to conduct some impromptu canine diplomacy. And if you're wondering whether all this chaos has made the galaxy a less organized place, I'll tell you what I tell every new diplomatic trainee: sometimes the best protocol is having the wisdom to know when protocols don't matter. Just remember to bring snacks. That part's non-negotiable. End report. P.S. Lieutenant Waffles, I starts her diplomatic training next week. I've already reinforced my quantum data pads.